was struck by the Nativity Scene. We're in the midst of practicing for our Christmas play, and you heard the two songs. I am blown away. Those were amazing. There are some phenomenal songs, and I unfortunately know all the words, so I sing it all the time. I find myself humming it. And I don't know, any parents out there know the words or to some of the songs? Okay, I see some heads bobbing. We were doing our practice after school, and I'm directing where the kids are going, and we have a nativity scene. And let's think about the elements of a nativity scene. You have Mary, and she's always holding the baby, lovingly looking at it, and then you have Joseph standing there very strong. And then you have the shepherds looking adoring, and of course you have the wise men, kneeling at the feet, with the credit card, right? And I got to thinking as I'm trying to explain to the students, okay, Mary, you stand there and you're looking at the baby, and she's doing a great job. In fact, she has a little toy that is pretending to be the baby, and she's looking at that so lovingly. And my Joseph, they're laughing over there because they know I'm talking about them. Joseph is standing there very strong and straight, and he looks like he could take anything on. And the shepherds, they're not in the straight line yet, but they're looking at the baby. And it was struck me that we kind of whitewash and clean and Clorox that scene. Have you ever really thought about what that scene really looked like? Let's go ahead and go to the Word. We'll go ahead and check in with Luke. So if you want to follow along, or you can listen to me read, if you're like, this really is my day of rest and I'm just going to listen, you do that. But we'll go to Luke chapter 2, and we'll start at the very beginning, which according to The Sound of Music, which is one of our teacher's favorites movies, is a very good place to start, right? So in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. Have you ever looked at a map of that time period? The entire Roman world was quite huge. Think about the worst vacation you've ever had. You got that in your mind? What made it bad? I can think of a Christmas trip that doubled. I think ice had something to do with the car breaking down. But that is nothing compared to this trip. They weren't even going for the holidays. They were going because of taxes. Now, if you guys think it's bad having to do your taxes, I know I'm over on my computer, or if you go to like H&R Block, you bring, all your papers and they crunch the numbers. This was worse. You had to travel for this census, and they just wanted to count you. And think about what that involved. 2 years ago, I had a once-in-a-lifetime experience of going to the Holy Land, which I think should be renamed the Dusty Land. I am telling you, my feet have never been so dirty. I purposely did not take any pictures or Instagram that because I would not want to inflict that on anyone. But I was several shades darker in the crayon box on my feet because it is so dusty. And the sandals I wore, everything got stuck in, and my sandals have little cutouts. And when I took them off, my feet had the pattern of the sandal. It was so bad because the walking. When we walked through the city of Jerusalem, for short people, that's a dangerous place. And kids, you're with me. You go through, and it's the land of the tall people, and you get lost, especially if you're following someone. Luckily, I have a tall friends. Well, most of my friends are all tall. And so I held onto her backpack, and I just followed her through, like my guide through the city, because it's so crowded, and it's congested, and you literally have no elbow room, and deodorant is not utilized. And then you mix in the smells of the food, and I'm talking, the word cacophony? That's what it was. We were just like physically assaulted by the crowds, the smells, the people, the sounds. And there was one point where my hand let go, and all I could think of was the woman reaching out to grasp Jesus' hem. I was grasping out for my friend. Luckily, I saw one of the other gentlemen who was preferably tall, and we had teased him about the hat he wore, but I saw that hat, and that was my lifesaver. I followed that hat to safety. But I'm thinking about this was a trip that was the very worst trip. They had to go not because they were going to see family, but because the government told them to. Now, we're not going to talk politics, but I want you to think about how many of you like the government telling you what to do. Seriously, we're not talking politics, okay? You don't have to say anything, but think about that in your heart. How many of us like to be told what to do at all? Yes, I'm looking at you guys. My kids are just laughing. So here they are on the trip that never ends, and let's talk about what was their mode of transportation. Well, there weren't cars or planes. They had to walk. They had to walk everywhere. None of them ever had to have a Fitbit to know how many miles they walked, because that was just life, right? And I will tell you, it is a very hilly region. You go up and down, up and down. If ever we knew we were going to go hike to some kind of ruins, it was another word for hike up. And not only that, but let's talk about who is Joseph bringing with him. He's bringing Mary with him. So we'll skip down to verse 4. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. So I have a map here. Well, you guys can't see it. You'll have to take my word for it. Or maybe look it up on your phone. But it says that he is going from where? Who's following along? Okay, so he's going from the town of Nazareth. And Nazareth is down here. And he is going up. Now, I will tell you, it's not doesn't look that far on a map, But if you think about that, if you have to walk, that's kind of far. And he has a little excess baggage. Well, I want to call Mary baggage. But let's just say Mary was walking for two. And we consider that hopefully she had a donkey. At least that's what all the pictures portray. And so you have a very heavily pregnant woman on a journey to a town, and this is not a trip you wanted to make. But it gets worse. She's about ready to pop. She's heavily pregnant. Can you imagine every step of the way Joseph is probably watching her, every step the donkey is taking? And then they get there to the town, and it says here, while they were there, verse 6, the time came for the baby to be born. That is a very nice way of saying she was ready to deliver and there was no stopping. Now, best case scenario, she would have been at home with the women of her family or his family helping to deliver. There would have been someone there that knew what to do, but it gets worse. They have no place to deliver. She gave birth to her firstborn son, so she is a newbie. She doesn't know what's going on. I want you guys to think out there, how was your first birth? Yeah, was there a little concern for you? What is going on here? And she is giving birth, and who is there to deliver? Joseph. Now, ladies, and you don't have to say anything because your husbands are probably sitting next to you, but how many of you would have liked your husbands to have delivered your baby? Have you no experience, by the way? Because if your husband is a doctor and is qualified, maybe. But here's not only that, is she's inexperienced, her husband is delivering the baby, but where does she deliver the baby? In a barn. Yes. Let's talk about a barn. Any of you been in a barn? What is in a barn? Hay. What else? Animals. And the input and output process of animals. There's the food, but there's also what comes out of the animals. So I want you to picture this. Mary is basically very young, inexperienced mother giving birth in a dirty barn with who knows what else creatures are in there, being delivered by her husband. Why? Because there was no room in the inn. Have any of you guys ever been denied entrance somewhere? When I was traveling, moving from Texas to Oregon, it's a 36-hour trip straight. And I know that because I drove it in 38 hours. Now, I will say I recommend not doing that. And it wasn't on purpose. I had a plan. I loaded up my car, and all my worldly belongings were on a van, a big old van that the church had provided. And they were going to head out, and I was going to meet up with the van at my house. And so I started out driving, and I thought, well, looked at the map, because back then didn't always have GPS. We were our own GPS. Scary, right? Looked at the map, and I decided that in Colorado, I was going to stop, and this was a good place to stop. And so we drove. I got to Colorado, and I'm like, okay, this is a big enough city. Surely there will be a place to stay. Stop at the first hotel, the one that has the logo, "We'll leave the lights on for you." Well, the lights were on, but everybody was home. I pulled in, and I got out, and I'm like, "Hey, I'd like a room." "I'm sorry, we're full. No vacancy." "Oh, okay. Maybe it's because their rates are so good. I'm going to have to just pinch that wallet open a little bit more, pull out a little bit." Okay, but at this point, a bed is worth it. Even a bathroom would have been worth it. So I go to the next hotel, and it had a number in it. I won't tell you. But I will tell you, the number 0 came to mind because they had 0 beds filled. I went to the third hotel. I'm starting to think that there's a pattern here. And I finally asked, "Do you have any rooms?" He said, "No. We have this huge convention in town, and we're full." And I was like, feeling awful for myself because there was no place. And I thought, okay, I'll just get back in the car, and I'll drive to maybe a town where there isn't a convention. Do you guys ever have driver's foot, where it's like you just keep going, the whole Thomas the Train, I think I can. So you drive, and then it gets to be like 3 a.m. in the morning, and no one's going to let you in. And then I will tell you, if you've ever driven it, it's kind of a lonely, dark drive. And I have the windows rolled down, and I am singing. I have several drinks by the side to keep me liquidated and going. And if a cop had pulled me over at that moment, I don't know if I could have walked a straight line. But I was driving, and finally I got into Oregon, the top part. Are you guys familiar with that drive, across the top part of Oregon? Yeah, isn't that fun? Yeah. I was tired, so I pulled over to a rest stop. And once again, this is a cautionary tale of what not to do. Okay, pull over, got a few hours sleep. Oh, I forgot to mention, I had a motivator in the back seat in the form of my cat, who was in a cat carrier and was very unhappy and was very vocal and consistent in his vocalization of the unhappiness that was occurring. So I had a motivator. So I got like 2 or 3 hours sleep, and then I drove some more and got around and got to the part where I could see Mount Hood, and I was in awe of it. Wow, that's great. Keep going. Finally pulled in, and I'm not kidding you, unloaded the cat carrier and myself, unlocked the door, and I lay down on the carpet, and I slept for 12 hours. I was awoken by the sound of fireworks because it was the 4th of July. So now whenever I hear fireworks, I get a little bit of a twitch because I remember the drive. Now, for me, that stands out, but think about how much worse this was. There was no room. They were forced to go on this trip, not by choice. They're surrounded by smelly animals. This seems to be a really bad, hopeless situation. Yet this was a fulfillment of a promise back in Isaiah. So if you want to kind of keep a thumb or something there, we're going to hop back over to Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah 9, verse 6. And Beatrice read that so well. Okay, for to us a child is born. This wasn't say for to Mary or for to us. Us, guess what? You're the us. To us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And then verse 7, it says, of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. Who would have thought that that baby born in such terrible circumstances would be the fulfillment of this promise? Peace with no end. How many of us could use some peace with no end? Your kids are raising their hands. I was looking at that, and I had actually accidentally given Beatrice Isaiah 9:5. So this morning I was it's 6, because have you guys looked at 5? Sometimes we don't look before and after. Verse 5 says, every warrior's boots used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. I was like, wow, this talk would be very different if she had read that one, huh? But let's put it in context. This nugget of promise, of peace, comes in the midst of something pretty terrible and awful. My students and I are studying in Bible this year, the prophets, and we have concluded that being a prophet was the worst job you could ever have. No one wants to be a prophet. You know the term shoot the messenger? Yeah, I think it happened with that. We even played a little bit of a game of, how did the prophet die? And we had to try to match it up. And there were numerous that were stoned. I believe there was one that was sawed in half. There's quite graphic, and think about it. You have to go to a people and give them the worst message ever. You have to tell them God is unhappy with you. Now, who likes to be told that they're in trouble? No one likes to be told they're in trouble. Then you have to give this message, and you have to tell them God is unhappy. And so Isaiah spends more than the first half of Isaiah condemning the people, saying, hey, you've messed up. God's unhappy with you. But then he spends the last half giving comfort and hope. It's kind of like Jeremiah. Is another prophet I really enjoy. One of my power verses is Jeremiah 29:11. Anybody know that one? And if you want to turn over to it, or if you know it, for I know the what? Plans. Okay, folks, this is the fill in blank portion. For I know the what? Plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to what? Prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you what? Hope and a future. Wow, I love that, because I like to know that God has a plan, because how often do we not have a plan? And in this particular case, he then goes on and it promises not only in the present, but in the future. And don't we all need that? We need that hope that it's going to get better, that this is not it. And I wondered, what brought about this wonderful promise? Well, if you skip to the top of this verse, you're going to see, this chapter, mine says it's a letter to the exiles. What is an exile? Well, it's basically a person that's left behind or kicked out. Jeremiah had the lovely job of telling the people God was upset and he was going to let a foreign king, Nebuchadnezzar, punish them. And he then had the job of telling them, guess what? It says here in verse 10, this is what the Lord says, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. He has just told them that they're going to be in exile for 70 years, which basically meant if you were alive and heard that message, you were going to die there. So everyone except for maybe the very, very young, we're going to die there. They were not going to come back. He's giving them the worst message ever. But in it, there's this nugget of hope. And I started to think, why do we have, in the midst of these terrible messages, these nuggets of hope? Because that's when you need it the most, isn't it? You don't know you need the hope till you need the hope, right? Kind of reminds me of the reason why I don't like swimming. I have some students that are really into swimming, and I admire that. But the only reason I swim is if I need to get out of the water. And when I was growing up, we had this big public pool, and it was one of those that started off in the shallows and went way to the deep, and it had a diving board on the end. And my mother had told me and my brother, okay, you guys stay in the shallows. So she gave me 2 messages. First, stay in the shallows and watch your brother. Now, I was probably about 5, and my brother is about a year younger, so he's 4. And so she puts him in, one of those little floating inner tubes where it has the seat in the middle. So he sits and he's kicking his feet and having a blast. And she says, Elizabeth, do you want the floaties? You guys know what I mean by the floaties, the little arm things you have to blow up and you put in there. And I was like, no, I'm a big girl. I do not need floaties. So she said, stay in the shallow and watch your brother. Well, we're there in the shallows, and he's kicking and splashing me, and I'm splashing him. And in the midst of splashing him, what do you think happens to his little life preserver? He starts floating away from me. Now, I am now in a kind of quandary because I was given 2 things I was supposed to do. What was the first thing? Stay in the shallow. And the second thing was to what? I can't stay in the shallows and watch my brother. So I thought, not a problem. I will just tiptoe after him. So the water's here. I step out. The water's here. And he thinks this is hilarious. This is what? This is a game of keep-aways from sister. So he's just kicking his legs and he's floating away. Soon the water's up here. And now I'm on my tiptoes. You can imagine. And then, in some pools, there's a point at which it goes throomp. It doesn't make that sound, but you do. So I was like, shoo, whoosh. And all of a sudden, there was almost more water above me than below. And in that moment, I had an epiphany. I thought, I should have listened to my mother. I needed the floaties. I didn't know I needed the floaties till I needed the floaties. Well, at that moment, as I'm having this life thought moment, I get kicked in the head. I look up and I recognize that foot. That is my brother's foot. So I hold on to that foot like a lifeline, and I pull myself up, and I come over the edge of his sliding. Now, I have almost just died. And what does he do? Laughs in my face. It splashes me some more. Now, he will to this day deny remembering this. I have my doubts. Well, now I hold on to that like a life raft, because it is, and I start kicking us back to the shallows. Get to the shallows. I get out. I go over to my mother, and do you know what I asked for? The floaties. Whoops. Sorry, Mrs. Chaubert. We are the same way, aren't we? We need the floaties in the Bible. We need the hope that comes from Christmas. Because even though it was a dirty, very unsanitary situation, and even though all of the things that brought the manger to this point, we need that baby. But please don't leave the baby in the manger with the dirty diaper, with the cows and the shepherds that come in. Don't leave him there. Take him out. Take him with you. Apply him. Because that baby became the source of that promise in Isaiah. What was it again? He's called Wonderful what? Counselor. Mighty what? God. Everlasting. And the Prince of. Don't we all need a little of that? Well, when I was asked what the sermon was going to be, I didn't know at that point. So I've been reading a book by Max Lucado called Unshakable Hope. So hope has been on my mind. So I said, just hope for the holidays. And as I was thinking about that, I was remembering the best and the worst holiday. Any of you ever read Alexander's Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day? It's kind of a well-known children's book. This was Elizabeth's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad holiday. Fast forward a few years after the near drowning incident, and the holiday had begun. School was out. Sunday morning of the first day of vacation, my brother and I wake up early, and for once we weren't fighting each other, which I don't know, my mother said was more scary is if we were fighting each other, if we were in cahoots together. She says, because when you two were working together, then we had issues. But we had woken up and we looked around our house, and it was the horrible, no good, very bad holiday start because there was no tree, there were no decorations, no presents in sight, no holiday music. The small town that I grew up in had 3 sources of jobs and income. It was a small college town, kind of like Walla Walla, and you could either work at the college or the university, or you could work at Birdwell, which they made cleaning supplies, or you could work at Brandam's, which was a wood shop. And Brandam's had decided to close down just a few months before, and my dad was one of the men who had lost his job. So think about it, almost 1/3 of the men in this town were without jobs. And so for the next couple of weeks, my dad would go to job interviews and he would show up and he said, there's 20 other men there. Now, my parents had tried to keep this from us, not to worry us, but how many times do you know when your parents are worried? Yeah, my parents, their discussions they thought were quiet, but kids have ears that are like supersonic, like, whoo, they could hear everything. And we had heard that. And plus our mother, she had this little wrinkle in the middle of her forehead because she, when she gets worried, and sometimes her eyes were a little red, and my dad got quieter because he was starting to get more stressed out. And so my brother and I, we did not want to add more onto our parents' plate, but it's the holidays. So we decided we were going to bring Christmas to the house, and we looked around, and we're like, the first thing we need is what? A tree, right? Well, this is Texas, so I want to explain to you about trees in Texas. There are barely any. When I first came out here to interview, my face was like plastered against the window. Look at all the trees. They have a tree in their yard that's this big. They have more than one tree. Oh my goodness, look at that tree. The person who was driving me to my interviews was dying of laughter because I was so impressed at the trees. Because in Texas, if you had a tree in your yard, it's like about this big around, and it was a little bit of an embarrassment. So there weren't a lot of trees. Like here, you could go to the U-Pick or the, whatever. We didn't have a lot of those there because most of the time the trees that we got in Texas came from here. So I'm looking around and we got creative because we looked and our eyes lit upon the bookshelf. Now this was a bookshelf my dad had built from scraps of lumber. So this was a bookshelf. I don't know if we would have even been able to get the shelf out of the house because my dad built it in the living room. And this sucker was sturdy and heavy. I mean, it was far across, it had lines. I mean, he had built it to last. And we look and we think, well, it's built of wood. It once was a tree. So we take all of the books off the shelf and we pile it to the side. And then we're like, well, so I go into the linen closet and I get out a white sheet and put it there because it's snow. You guys with me here? Okay. And then and my poor dad, I'm sure he probably had a hard time, but we took thumbtacks, we tacked it, and then we strung the lights in the shape of a Christmas tree. Now, as a teacher, I am very impressed with myself for thinking of that, because how creative is that? I don't know how my dad felt, because he didn't say, but as an adult now, I would have been like, what? You put thumbtack? Anyways, we're moving on. Now, so we have now the shape of a Christmas tree with lights, but you gotta have more. You gotta have the tinsel. Now, we have a Christmas program, and I know how dated I am because one of the lines is, you have to have tinsel, and the kids are like, what's tinsel? I'm like, it's the worst thing ever to clean up. It is like aluminum foil that got shredded. So we put the tinsel carefully, and then we hung the bulbs on there, and we were thrilled because we had a tree. But what needs to go underneath the tree? Yes? Presents. Now, presents, we didn't have any, and our parents hadn't put any out, but the tree looked kind of sad without presents. So we looked around, and what had we taken off the shelf? That has the right shape. So yes, we wrapped every one of those books, and by the way, it was an encyclopedia set. This is before you could ask Google everything. You had to actually take a book off a shelf. And so we wrapped every letter in that alphabet. And we put those on the tree, and we sat back, and we're like, oh, we have a tree, we have decorations, we have presents, we put on Christmas music, and things were fine until Christmas Eve came. Because we knew that there weren't real presents on that tree. And what were we hoping for? Real presents. I mean, come on. How many of you guys want to have real presents? See, the kids are on. Thank you. There's some adults back there. Thank you. You want real presents. Are any of you like me where you see, I'm actually the worst present giver in that I will buy presents way ahead and like, hey, don't you want to open your present? It's October, Elizabeth. I don't want to open Christmas presents right now. But I love to give presents. And I'll admit, I like to get them too. But we were a little bummed because my mother, bless her, is the worst present wrapper ever. She waits till Christmas morning. Really, there was one day, one Christmas, that we were all out there waiting for her, and she's in the bathroom. She's locked herself in the bathroom to wrap the presents. So we are so desperate. This is when you had to wrap. This was before you had gift bags and tissue paper. We go and we get lunch bags, like you put your brown paper sacks, and we start slipping them under the door. We could even help her out. We could even written our names on them and put, to Elizabeth, love Mom. And we were slipping them under the door, and I said, Mom, we don't care. Just put the presents in the bag, and we'll toss it under the tree. So we knew that, there might be some presents, but they were going to take a little while to come out underneath the tree. And my mom had told us, hey guys, just know there probably aren't going to be a lot of presents this year. So we had our expectations really low. Well, the doorbell rings, and we go to the door, and we open it, and there was a couple that worked at the college, and they are there, and their arms are full. And my mother looks, and she gets a twinkle in her eye, and that little wrinkle disappears because the husband is holding bags of groceries. And she just helps usher him in. But my brother and I only had eyes for what was in the wife's arms. What do you think was in her arms? Presents. Oh, yeah. They were wrapped. They were piled high. Here, let us help you with that. That looks heavy. And then we go, and our mother had a rule, you don't open presents till Christmas. But we applied the puppy dog look. Please, Mom, could we perhaps open a present? We must have looked very pitiful, so she said we could open up one. Well, now the dilemma. Just one? That's easily solved. You open the biggest one, right? The biggest one, don't you? No? Oh, you have more self-control than I do. So I picked up the biggest one, and there was one that said for me and one for my brother, and it was big, and it was kind of squishy. And we're looking at it. We look at our mom. She goes, yes. And we were like velociraptors. What is it? Yeah. We were like, the wrapping paper went every which way. It was not pretty, but effective. We open it up, and we pull it out, and there was blankets. Now, if those of you who know me, I love textures. And so if someone's wearing a fuzzy sweater, I'm like, oh, how nice. I like to go through JCPenney's and through the towel department and just kind of test the towel. Well, if you guys paid me more, I could afford stuff. No. Sorry, that's my boss right there. I'm going to get a set of towels for Christmas, I can tell. But this was a fuzzy blanket, and it was big, and it was warm. My brother had one with dancing nutcrackers, and I had one with dancing bears. And we wrapped ourselves in it. Now, how many of you are willing to admit that you have a blanket? We're not going to call it a blankie. It's a blanket. How many of you have? Adults, do you guys have a blanket that gives you comfort, that keeps you warm? Okay, so this blanket then, for the rest of my childhood, had a place of honor on my bed. Now, I'll admit, I have that blanket still. It's in my linen closet. The edges are frayed. The bears are a little faded, and maybe they're not dancing. They may have taken a break. But whenever I get sick, I pull that blanket out, and I wrap myself up in it, because it's not just a blanket. It's comfort. And I remember what's associated with it. It's hope. And whenever I'm sick, that's when I need it the most, right? As you go through the holidays this year, and as you go into the new year, I want you to take this story and these promises and wrap themselves around you like hope. Back to Jeremiah 29:11. Whenever something happens and you're not quite sure, remember, God has a blanket of hope for you. I know the plans I have for you. There's a plan. Plan to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and give you a future. So remember, unwrap the baby from the manger, place him in your heart, and grab your blankie.